Hey, everybody, welcome to Fantastic Comics Presents. We're going to talk about Jim Shooter. And it's not just you and me, it's a couple other guys too. So hang out for some videos and we'll see you on the other side.
Aaron Sparrow here. You may know me as the writer of Darkwing Duck or Death Rage or the upcoming Kneel Before Doomface. And I just want to go ahead and tell you right now that Fantastic Comics is the greatest comic shop to ever exist in the history of this universe or any other universe.
Dan, Klaus! I really identified with the girls in Ghost World. They made me feel like I wasn't so alone.
Yeah, whatever. Do you know anyone who works at Batman? 'Cause I really want to draw Batman. I'm awesome at utility belts. Check these out. This is where the Batman keeps his money, in case he has to take the bus.
What's your prediction for the fight, then?
Prediction?
Yes, prediction.
Pain.
Where's your robe, Ignacio?
It was stinky, but these are my recreation clothes.
They look expensive.
Thank you. I mean, yes, they may have the appearance of riches, but beneath the clothes, we find a man. And beneath the man, we find his nucleus.
This is where he every day wearing a necklace like this, and he's in this urn.
Is his ashes?
Yeah, his ashes right here and here. Yep. So both of my grandpas right here.
What's that other thing on the necklace?
That's a Punisher emblem.
What's that about?
I like the Punisher just because he's he takes his the law into his own hands to punish the people that wronged him.
Dusty, go on over to that piano.
Oh, no.
No.
I haven't played in so long. I couldn't.
Been a long time.
All right. We're going to do a little number for you, but remember, we're a bit rusty, so bear with us. Just like the old days.
All right.
Maestro?
My little buttercup has the sweetest smile. Dear little buttercup, won't you stay a while? Come with me where moonbeams paint the sky, and you and I might linger in the sweet by and by. Oh, dear little buttercup, with your eyes so blue. Oh, little buttercup, you're a dream come true. You and I will settle down in a cottage built for two. Dear little buttercup, I love you.
Everybody!
My little buttercup has the sweetest.
It's my
Great.
Dear little buttercup, won't you stay out?
Wild.
You and I will settle down in a cottage built for two. Dear little buttercup, sweet little buttercup,
My little buttercup.
I love you.
Kill or be killed, what is it going to take for people like you and Dingle to get along with the East Coast?
Look, I don't know, man. I mean, these guys got their fucking talking dolls and shit.
Questions, Professor Pickles?
What? I ain't no Professor Pickles.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, don't mess with the East Coast. Look, I don't need you defending me, you howdy-doody looking motherfucker. I'm out of here, yo. Yeah, I'm with him. Man, step off.
The point is, you gotta have a goal and go for it. I have a goal, something I always wanted and thought was impossible.
Being able to think without moving your lips?
No. That's not enough anymore. My goal is something much bigger than that.
So, how do you go about reaching this goal?
The way you go about getting it is to do every little thing in your life the best you can. If you do everything perfectly, eventually you'll reach your goal. Therefore, I'm going to do everything perfectly. I've got to start at the bottom and do as well as I possibly can the most meaningless, insignificant, mindless acts. Like my job, for instance. Boss, how much does a good cab driver make in a night?
$150.
What was my best night?
You once broke $12.
Boss, I want to drive again. I want to go right back out there on those streets and drive another shift. A perfect shift. I want to be a perfect cab driver. I want to be perfect.
Well, you're on the right track. You've already made a perfect ass of yourself.
All right!
All right, come out to our blast out.
For shame, Doc. Hunting rabbits with an elephant gun.
Elephant gun?
That's right, Doc. So why don't you go shoot yourself an elephant? You do, and I'll give you such a pinch!
We're going to start our volleys. We hope you like the show. Everything is ready. We're raring to go. We'll give you all the latest songs and dances full of pep. We're gonna start with high chops. Just watch this chorus steps.
Originally settled as Ocean View during the 1850s, the city's population boomed with displaced
But in my own way, I am king. Hail to the king, baby.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for hanging in there. Thanks for coming on in and joining us this week. We're going to be talking about Jim Shooter in just another few seconds. There's a few little bits of business I have to get to. I guess for those of you that don't know what's going on here.
My name is Yule Carter, comic book retailer in Berkeley, California.
That's right. Every Wednesday through Sunday, 12 to 5 p.m. All right, I'll be open Friday. I've been like, do I want to be open Friday? The July the 5th, 4th, I mean. The 5th of July, 12 to 5. I don't know. If nobody comes in, though, I'm leaving early. So make sure you come on in. There's not a whole lot of new comic books, so Jim Shooter died on the right week. You know, we don't have to really spend a whole lot of time talking about them. In fact, we're not going to. Just come on in. Buy some comics, maybe buy an old comic that Jim was editor-in-chief of. maybe a writer of. I'm sure I have some Avengers, maybe some Superboys. And if not, I'm sure we can find them. So come on in, go to your local comic store, buy some comic books, and maybe talk about Jim. And if you learn anything new here that you haven't heard before, maybe you can wow your friends with some of that info. All right. I'm not gonna really waste a whole lot of time, so I'm gonna invite our guests on right now. First up, we've got someone who can shed light on what it's like to be an editor, a writer, an all-around cool dude. Although I'm not sure if Jim was, but maybe this guy knows whether or not he was.
You have that look about you.
One that says I need a drink. One that says you need a positive review.
We're fellow travelers, warriors of words, soldiers of syntax, pugilists of prose.
Writers.
Joe Corallo, welcome to the show.
Hello, welcome to me.
Holy cow, you got action figures behind you.
Yeah, I feel like all these douchebags that do these sort of things have crap behind them. So
yeah, for sure. I mean, this stuff would have been here anyway. I don't make it up like, this ain't no Friday nights or anything like that.
Nah, this is where this thing usually is. And now that I adjusted the room a bit, I'm like, I might as well leave that there. It's fun.
Yeah, because I always thought you were like in a closet before.
Yeah, no, it's more like I was actually recording in front of what used to be a closet that was taken off in a larger room, but just to try to control the sound a little bit. That was,
So, Joe, you write comic books, and you have a comic book that just came out recently. Would you like to tell the people about that?
I do. King Arthur and the Knights of Justice, Volume 2, Morgana's Revenge. She goes a lot harder this time. It's been a lot of fun. I've done some interviews for it. Someone referred to it as My Wrath of Khan, and I'm fine with that. That works for me. It's right. Like,
that's pretty awesome. If you ask me, I'm gonna have to really read this now.
Yeah, no, it was fun. There's a lot more Arthurian legend stuff in this. Like, I was like, just why not have the Grail in it? Why not, the Grail, the Coin of Necromancy, King Lot, and King Lot's castle, and all these things. Like, I wanted to dive more into, sort of the legend of that. So I hope people enjoy it. There's some dark turns that go about there. There's some Morgana really messing up some guards at the British Museum. It's a good time.
Awesome. That came out just a couple weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Just mid-June. I was just at ALA, the American Library Association conference in Philadelphia this year, promoting that over the weekend. So it was good.
How did that go?
It honestly went really well. No joke. When I was in the author section, because they have a separate author section they set up for signings, I was next to this older gentleman, and I just had a steady flow of people coming in. And, that's part of, what Mad Cave was doing. They were directing people there. They weren't just, Corallo fanatics coming around. The publisher was, leading people my way. But the guy comes over, and no joke, he goes, "Oh, I see everyone's coming over to your table, so I thought I'd see what all the fuss is about over here." And he was a white guy of a certain age and dressed a certain way that I was just like, you know what? I bet this guy likes classic Doctor Who. And turns out I mentioned John Pertwee, and he lit up, and we were just talking about 70s Doctor Who for a minute before he went back to his table. So it was a good time.
Joe, you're the best, man. You can be on anybody's show. Whose show can you not be on, do you think?
I have no idea. So
and you do a Doctor Who podcast? Is that still going on?
I still show up a lot on the Mad Men in a Box with Pixel and Oz Chris, and occasionally Jimmy Quirks shows up on there too. But yeah. You know, so people should check that out if you like Doctor Who, or if you hate Doctor Who. Who cares? Watch it anyway.
Now, you also edit comic books. Do you have anything that's out right now that's something you've edited before? I mean, recent?
The trade paperback of Green Hornet Miss Fury should be out this month.
Oh, really? You were working on that?
I edited that.
I didn't realize that. That's great.
Yeah, no, it was a lot of fun. So
I'll try not to slam dynamite this episode. Okay.
No, that's good. And Federico Ceresa, though, great artist. He's going places. Like, you should pick this up. Get in on the ground floor with Federico Ceresa, because when he is absolutely doing like a big 2-book in the next like 2-3 years, you'll be able to be that douchebag that could be like, yeah, well, I was reading him back when, he was, over at Dynamite. So
doing Green Hornet and who?
Miss Fury.
Fury. All right.
Yeah.
The Jay Lee covers, of course.
Yeah.
Awesome. Anything else? I thought you had something else that came out recently. Maybe I'm wrong.
I did. There's a few things. Honestly, I was in the Young Men in Love New Romance Anthology.
Oh, you wrote something there.
I wrote an 8-page story in that, which was great. I worked with Chase Bluestone. We did like a gay Toy Story thing, so I got to have all this like dialogue in it of like, you think he likes toys from the boys aisle and things like that. So it was cute. It's cute crap like that. So if you love that, check that out. And then I also got comps for my first DC story in a hardcover, because the Coagula story that I did last year for DC Pride Celebration Rachel Pollack was reprinted in DC Pride To the Farthest Reaches. So if you got that hardcover, you got a Joe story in there. And if you didn't get it, and now I have a story in it, you can impress your friends by picking it up and being like, oh, I knew that. I actually know the guy. I listened to him on YouTube. He's pretty good.
That's right.
Pick it up.
I heard he's been on Fantastic Comics Presents.
Right?
A guy they will never say that about, I would like to introduce to all of you right now.
Hey, let's do that 2,000-pound man thing. I'll be that Carl Reiner guy, and you be what's-his-face.
Ladies and gentlemen, this gentleman here is one of the phenomena of the world. He looks no older than Mr. Sean, and yet he is 2,000 years old. Is that true, sir?
Yes. You want to see my driver's license?
No, we have it authenticated. The Mayo Clinic has checked you out and said that you are 2,000.
Welcome, Eric Breen.
Not only do you make me follow Joe with all of his accolades and accomplishments, you run a bit about a 2,000-year-old and then introduce me.
All those other shows that you're on that like make fun of you being old and everything.
Why should this be any different?
Well, that too. But I mean, at least I go and pick videos that other people made and I put them together to represent.
Sure, you go the extra mile. I
appreciate it. I really do.
I'm just glad I lasted long enough to see it.
There aren't that many videos. Welcome, Eric. You're our resident curmudgeon. You're like one of those guys that doesn't read new comics, or is that untrue?
Well, that is quite untrue. I read about 40 a month now.
Wow, really? You're up to
maybe closer to 30 because I said this like we were talking about. So I mentioned that it's a light week this week. We do a top 5 show on Tuesday nights. I had 3, but there are a lot of weeks when I actually get into double digits, which is much more than I was doing, say, 2 or 3 years ago. So,
what are you leaning on heavily to get those numbers?
Combination of DC. I think I'm reading 13 DC titles.
Wow.
Probably. It depends on how many miniseries are going at a time. Since most indies seem to be that, like Space Ghost, Dick Tracy, Johnny Quest. I'd be getting the Johnny Quest Space Ghost team up if it ever came out.
It's coming.
Okay, good. Glad to hear that. I've decent amount of indies. I like Pop Kill just ended, but it's definitely between 20 to 30, I guess. And one Marvel.
One Marvel.
And
hold on, let me guess. Are you reading my favorite book, West Coast Avengers?
No. I heard it was good from people actually not just you, but it's gone. So
it's true.
It's getting attached to a Marvel series is like getting attached to people in a terminal in hospice. It's not going to last.
So what is that one book?
Ultimate Spider-Man.
Oh, of course. I remember us talking about that. That is a good book for sure. I'm a Hickman fan, and I'll suffer through a lot of stuff, but I like him a lot. And his Spider-Man, I'm a big fan of. Let's say hello to the audience, and then let's get with it. I think some people have already said something about Jim. And also, since this is like, us getting together, it's not me trying to make any money on the show. Not that I would. We're just going to make sure that this thing isn't monetized, and we're going to play this.
We didn't come to borrow any money. We didn't come to borrow any dough. We didn't come to borrow any trouble. We just stopped in to say hello. Oh, hello to you, Mr. Penny. Please don't think that we are hammy. We just stopped in from Alabama. We just stopped in to say hello. Oh boy, you said it. We just stopped in to say hello. And don't forget it. We just stopped in to say hello. And I'm hello. Hello. Goodbye.
Erica Sullivan was here first saying, I look at my spinner rack and it's mostly populated with Marvel Comics of fall 1981. The Columbia 10-speed bike contest banner ad on the covers. I was 8 going on 9 years old with pocket change. All shooter. R.I.P. I agree. Is 1980s Marvel, like late 70s, mid 80s, is that like the best Marvel, or do you guys have like a different time period that you think is even better?
I think the late 70s, with a few exceptions, was kind of a down period at Marvel because they'd just gone through the revolving door of EICs, and Shooter was getting used to the job. But I think the first half of the 80s the first half of the 60s, when it was all created, if you like discount that, first half of the 80s, because when we think about, and we'll talk, I'm sure, later, all the great runs, that would be, I think, impossible to top.
The 60s, like the very beginning.
Well, yeah, but like I said, if you disqualify that,
I see.
Because like I said, it's unfair to compare, because
without that,
none of this exists afterwards.
So. I mean, we do this in everything anyway. We see how would this champion do against the Yankees of the 50s and whatnot.
Well, the stories in the 80s were better, of course, because writing had matured, but they were still written as comic books and not screenplays, not for the trades, not for the omnibuses. But also you're working with material that wouldn't exist had the people in the 60s not have created it all. So that's why I kind of like try to avoid comparing those.
But we can't help but do it. I mean, if I find out that somebody likes a comic book from, that's run forever, especially in the days when there was just one volume, you have to know where that person's coming from, so that you could, you might not have read all the things that they have, and vice versa. Right.
True.
I mean, it's just one of those things. I mean, I was listening to a show before we came on, and they were saying, the different eras of people that read comics, you can, by talking to them, you can find out what, but that's where Joe comes in. This guy is well more versed than most normal people, right, Joe? I mean, you can say that about yourself.
Sure. Yeah,
Sure.
I guess. Sure. It's
I mean,
late.
I've only read a few Legion of Superheroes that that Jim Shooter wrote, and I don't know how about you, Eric. How many have you read?
Probably all of them, but I don't know which ones were his because I've never looked up, and they didn't credit a lot in those days. So it's
Yeah, and Joe, you have read a lot of the Legion, also, right? So
I mean,
Eric,
I've read all that. Yeah, I mean, I have all the archives, and I have the hardcovers that bring it all the way through. You know, the Curse. When after that they start doing the Baxter paper ones, and but yeah, I actually the only things I have signed from Jim Shooter are Legion hardcovers.
Nice.
So I've got my volume 5, which was his first grouping, and volume 6.
All right. Nice.
Yeah.
So I haven't read a lot of them. I never read I mean, some, but not a lot. They're kind of hokey, and the art, it's not as good as if, like the Giffen for me, like when I cut my teeth. And I went back and I read some like Staten and Swan. Staten did some, right? Maybe I'm wrong about
with Conway. It was mostly Conway.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
And I really recently got into that James Sherman. He draws fantastic asses, man and woman.
I got to meet James Sherman like a year and a half ago.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. No,
you said he draws great asses.
No, but I mean, we were going over that a little bit, but because I was showing him. I had hardcovers with like his different Legion stuff, so I brought them over and signed. But he had some copies and color test pages and stuff of those pages. So when I was showing him, he's like, "Oh, you got to see," and he's like show me had me open up the book to a certain thing and then take it out, like the color proofs to show me that. Like it was really cool.
So I want to let you guys know that I've been reading all of these books again, and I'm going through and only finding the Jim Shooter stuff, and he is late 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, like most of the 90s, like half of the 90s, let's say. It's pretty impressive. It's a pretty long time working in comics. Being successful most of the time, maybe. Jury's out. I think for the most part.
For the most part, I would say. Yeah.
All right. Yo, Fantinuum says, yeah, I heard the news last night about Jim Shooter's passing. Man, time for all of us is passing too quickly. The 80s seemed like it was yesterday. How do you feel about that, Eric? Do the 80s seem like yesterday?
I wish. No, it seems like the almost 40 years ago that it is.
Yeah, just a little bit longer, actually.
No, it depends on how far back in the 80s you go. But
yeah,
it's getting there now. Because some people, do you realize that if you were born in 1985, you are now 40? And I know that comes as like a jolt to some people when they just get there. Those of us, whose 40-year-old birthday is old enough to drink, we're used to it now. But
so, Joe, you only recently were able to start drinking, right? We always portray him as the baby of the bunch, but when were you reading comics? What was coming out when you were reading them? Just for
I was getting into them. I was in 3rd grade when I was getting into the Archie Sonic the Hedgehog comic books that were coming out.
Wow.
So that's like what got me into that, and then had me like dragging my poor parents all across Long Island to different shops to go back issue diving to fill in the gap.
Wow.
Because I started like issue 28, so it's like, oh well, there's all these issues I still have to get. So going from store to store over the summer, like trying to to fill that in. I got a subscription mailed to the house like that. That series is what got me into comics in that way, like going to the convenience store, to the spinner rack, because at times I was able to sort of like walk to town and do that. So like that, and over time I eventually
No, keep going. Over time, what?
I was gonna say,
eventually?
over time I got more into sort of the Marvel DC stuff. By the time I was in high school, Ultimate Spider-Man and Runaways was going on, so I was getting those, and that got me really into like Marvel monthly comics. So then
How does I'm sorry, I want to ask you though, I'm serious. How does, for me and Eric, I know there was like no option when you get into it or you don't get into it. It's going, and it's not going to stop and start over for you or anything like that. It's just going to keep going. It's going to end and never come back. But for you, it's still being, comics are still being produced that way, but there's always a new number one. But how was getting into something, was that easy for you? Because I feel like a lot of people these days, they only start at number one. And I can understand the desire to do that, but it's not how comic stories are. It's not how they were like portrayed to us back in the day. Not like today. Not like the story.
Right. But it wasn't a thing to me, but like that, it was a different time in a lot of ways, because like, that's also just not how anyone got into TV. It's not how anyone got any of these things, It used to be like you eventually caught it on TV, and ratings.
Wait for summer reruns.
Yeah. Ratings and popularity show most people never got on board. Like usually the most popular sitcoms, for example, they pick up steam second, third season.
Right.
Like it took, they were, sometimes 50, 70 episodes in before they became a cultural phenomenon. So, I mean, that was just standard. I think it might have even partially the company marketing in general, because I think, pushing for number ones, once they started that and they had to push like, oh, you got to get it. It's collectors, the collector's item aspect of a number one is really what started. It started because of the collectors, and that started affecting the readers as well. And now we just live in a society where if you want to start a show, you start at the first episode because of how streaming works. And like, it's just harder to break that kind of habit. But at the time for me, that wasn't like a thing. You wouldn't think to be like, oh, well, I have to buy number one. You'd be like, oh, what's the new thing? I'll get the new thing. And then just go from there.
Breen, when you go to the comic store, do you just pick up a comic for S&Gs and see how it is, regardless of what issue number it is? Or do you feel compelled to start at the beginning also?
No, if something's good, if I hear something has good word of mouth, I mean, I've picked up series, but it's mostly, at this point, it's mostly DC, because if you're talking about an indie, by the time you hear about it being good, you might be on issue 3, but it's going to end with issue 5. So you may as well just wait for the trade.
For sure.
Yeah. So that's definitely changed. But DC titles that actually last long enough to change creative teams without relaunching. Say like Tom Taylor becomes Dan Waters, say on Nightwing. I may be inclined to give that a try, because I think the longer you do this, you start. A lot of times you follow creators more than titles now, because I think that is a byproduct of the endless relaunches. There's no reason to stay loyal to a particular title, because it's going to be relaunched in 6 months anyway, more than likely.
Yeah. This is a sad fact. Let's get through these guys. A Lifted Lawyer says, hey, all. Joby Pills in the other room saying hello. How's your father? Says evening jets. You can call us jets too. Improbi, take the 4th off. Your customers will understand. Yeah, but I can get work done. I might as well. I'm such a sucker. Picked up the 2nd volume of King Arthur and the Knights of Justice. Really dug it.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Dwayne Moose says, good Tuesday evening, Yule and Joe. Jim Shooter, RIP. I bet you didn't know about Eric. Joe needs his own show. Joe, do you have time to do your own show?
Not right now. Maybe one day.
What would your show be like? What would you do?
I just want to I don't know, just talk to people about things, have actual level-headed conversations. I'm not
about
really
anything.
I mean, I would like to talk about more or less whatever to a point, but you got to keep some focus or else, people, you have to be at a certain level when you can just kind of be a person who just talks about whatever. I feel like, you gotta at least advertise. We're going to talk about, Jim Shooter, or we're going to talk about, something.
Yeah.
But beyond that, yeah.
It's hard to not have an idea. Anyone know how good that comic 14-year-old Jim Shooter wrote and got published at Marvel? How good that 14-year-old Jim Shooter. Well, he wrote a DC comic at 14, or 13/14. But there was a young kid involved with Jim Shooter, and that's the Secret Wars bit. But we'll get to that, I'm sure, in a second. Yule, holy cow, you've got action figures behind you. Joe, yeah, I feel like all these douchebags who do that sort of thing have crap behind them. Me, I feel personally attacked. Or should we have read that? Oh, wait, you guys talking? Excellent. You guys keep talking to each other. Dwayne Moose says, hello, Eric Breen. Okay, got you there. Everybody's happy with that. Spider Guy says, RIP. The RIP crew's back. Yeah, that's definitely true. 80s feels like yesterday. Cocaine's a hell of a drug. In high school, for me, Image launched. Woof, baby, man. Same for me. I still have my copy of Youngblood #1. And Dwayne Moose says, and he had his early concept drawings of the Fatal Five on notebook paper, scripts, and a beautiful letter from Kurt Swan encouraging Jim. Dude, those guys were really nice to a kid back then, whether or not they knew he was a kid. I just got a form letter anytime I try to get into comics. What about you, Joe? Anything like that?
No, I never really did any write-in stuff like that. My brother James did. There was a contest or whatever for, this is early 2000s, I want to say, to write into Marvel with it was one of those here's the Hulk with an empty balloon in a panel, and what would the Hulk say here? And he was one of the runners up and got mailed a free copy of the Incredible Hulk Uno, which I believe he still has the Incredible Hulk themed Uno deck in his possession.
Eric, you got the Incredible Hulk Uno deck?
No, but I used to have an Incredible Hulk #1 with a BB hole through the head.
Oh, damn. I used to play Uno with Mad Magazine inspired cards.
Nice.
Is anything going on in the game? Did Shohei hit a home run?
I when I'm on the Yule Carter show, I give my undivided attention. It's 6-1.
Yeah, baby.
Yeah, they're playing the White Sox. Don't get too excited.
I'm not that excited. All right, let me go through a few particulars here. Everybody's talking about his first book. I got some pictures to go along with it. Here it is. $346. He wrote that when he was 13, and it got accepted or purchased, and then at 14 it was published. This was in July of 1966, if I have the date right. And then he did a follow-up issue. It was a two-part. I guess it wasn't a two-parter, but it was these two issues right here. And I guess like two-parters weren't really a big thing at the time. Anybody know that about DC Comics? They're all
Those
very like
were not
one-shot.
big, and yeah.
And there had been like a few times when they might have done it before, but it was like Jim Shooter that was kind of bringing that style back, and it bled into other like comic books within DC, like Superman for a little bit and stuff like that. The problem with these books is that a lot of times people would just be on it for a little while, and then they would get moved to the other Superman book or something like that, it seemed. And then it was just like this revolving door of people coming in and writing a story that was undoing or forgetting or not even paying attention to anything that happened, even if it was just the issue before. There was no real good quality control when it came to stuff back then, at least in that regard.
Well, there was also the belief that when it was in the newsstand days that there were no guarantees that little Jimmy was going to be able to get the next issue. And DC was, even though Legion, ironically enough, since it was being written by a child, did aim a little bit older than their other superhero books. I don't know if that was by design or happenstance, but yes, but yeah, there was no real reason to have anything carry over.
Yeah.
And so you guys are familiar with these books. What do you think about them? Did you read the ones before this? Is there a markedly better difference between Jim Shooter and the adult that was writing it beforehand?
Yeah, there are good stories beforehand for sure, and there were some that were coming up as they were getting there. I mean, I think you have, what was it, the Computo story where the where Computo kills one of the triplicates and turns her into Duo Damsel was shortly before Shooter came on, and that's a great one. You know, but I mean, before that, you're looking at, what was it? You'd get like Otto Binder writing some. You'd get Jerry Siegel wrote some. He created Bouncing Boy. You know, but then I mean, a lot of times, yeah, you'd get Edmund Hamilton wrote a lot of them beforehand.
I'm sure not everybody's familiar with that name.
Yeah, but he did a lot of like Superman office stuff.
Gotcha.
So, but yeah, I mean, there were some really good things going on, but the overall quality was just like, it was good enough to have Jim as a fan. And it was good enough to really start, even back then, it was really starting to create like a fan base because there was just more attention to continuity for whatever reason in a book like that. Like there was a long running, before Jim took over, a long running feud with the Time Trapper that did have a payoff. You know, it was a bit silly Silver Age nonsense sort of payoff, and it involved, you know, Legion babies, but you know, Mort Whitesinger just loved that. But yeah,
who doesn't?
But no, but
Muppet babies, Legion babies.
Jim completely revolutionized that book. He added a ton of characters, a ton of villains. He gave, one of the things prior to Jim taking over the book was, outside of the Time Trapper and a couple of other villains, like that, there just weren't any antagonists in the Legion that really stuck. You know, Computo later would. You know, it wasn't until I think it was Paul and Keith that brought Computo back for the first time in that annual in the early 80s. You know, before that, Computo was just a one-off. But I mean, the Fatal Five are easily their most sort of enduring popular villains. Again, outside of maybe the Time Trapper, but
right.
And Shadowlass is an incredibly popular Legionnaire. Like a lot of them, Karate Kid, Princess Projectra. Just like the villains he created, Nemesis Kid's another one who's shown up a lot. Like, it's incredible. Sort of he's the one who came up with the Brainiac sort of being in the future, and these sort of like all those different the Dominators. We take that for granted. The Khun's of the Dominators, two of the single most used alien villains outside of the obvious ones like Kryptonians, were villains from his first Legion run. Like it's crazy, and a lot of those stories hold up. I think it's some of Kurt Swan's most dynamic work when he was collaborating with Jim, because Jim was doing layouts for a lot of this himself. And you just see Kurt Swan doing things he normally wouldn't do. And it really stands out and makes it so interesting, I think.
That's pretty. I'm amazed that like these are some veterans that have been around a while. I mean, you look at Kurt Swan and you're like, oh, he did this issue of Superman, and then you go back 100 issues and you're like, oh, he did this issue of Superman. And you go back another 100, or you're like 100 issues of something else. It's like, oh, there's Kurt Swan again. He's doing all this stuff. And then, of course, like all the other people that you expect to see. I'm amazed that they were getting up to work with a kid.
Yeah,
that's pretty amazing. I'm like, I've read or seen like things about like ball players. And when the young kid comes to town and the aging right fielder knows that his time is almost up, he's like being kind of a dick to the young guy, and stuff, but kind of giving him what for. But these guys, man, that's pretty cool that they were throwing him this bone. Do you think? Let me ask Eric. Later on in his career, it's going to be a big deal that creators' rights and people getting what their just desserts for creating stuff come up. He says that when he was a kid at 14, that he knew that whatever he was creating, because Joe just named a shit ton of stuff that mainstream DC, not Legion books, are still using to this day. He said, oh, well, I knew I was doing work for hire stuff. Now, whether or not he actually knows it, I mean, can a 14-year-old really make that assessment?
If anybody could, it probably would have been him.
Sure.
But one thing before I answer that, I know one of the problems that DC had in the 60s when Marvel started eating into their market share and would seem to be attracting an older, hipper audience. And DC's problem was there were basically a bunch of buttoned up middle-aged men.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder why they never went to the kid and said, hey, what are the kids like? Because they came to all the wrong conclusions when they would try to do things. I mean, hell, the only thing they actually halfway lucked into was the go-go checks, but that was more designed to stand out on the newsstands than the racks. But as far as I remember the same time that he was doing that, I have like a sports analogy. Free agency wasn't a thing yet. Free agency did to sports what creator owned did for this industry. Until no one ever thinks about it until someone thinks about it and is able to implement it. So now creator owned is it prevents Marvel or DC from ever having any really, really creative things being done there, and why everybody is a derivative of like every character is a family now and blah blah blah.
Or they have like one main person that's allowed to do the creating because they know that person's going to be with them for a certain amount of time, it seems like.
And now it's like, if you liken that to sports, nobody stays in the same place anywhere, and they're like all protecting their brand. It's their brand first, the team second. That's kind of, the work for hires. You are looking out for yourself. And, I said, whether that's a good thing. I mean, it depends on whose perspective you want. I mean, from the fan, creator owned, probably, we would probably be getting better stuff if that had never happened. And like in sports, if there wasn't free agency, your favorite player might be on your favorite team his whole career. In which case you only get if you've got more money than everybody else. So it's, I don't know. But yeah, he may have had a sense of that. I mean, because that took business sense beyond his years. But again, there wasn't anything to compare it to. So
Sure.
it's easy to say that.
Right.
Yeah.
With the exception of, I think, Bob Kane, right? That guy was pretty shrewd, and he worked out the right deal. Oh, and the Wonder Woman dude also. They had a good deal with DC for the Wonder Woman.
That's true.
I mean, it's happened, but I mean, those guys were Bob Kane was like in publishing, or his dad was in publishing. I mean, he knew all the people to talk to or something like that. Is that right, Joe? Is that what? Well, but this isn't about Bob Kane. Fuck that guy.
Yeah, no, but he had more of a concept of the studio system and how to work it and all of that.
So he lasted 4 years and then went to college or did advertising during that time. It's kind of amorphous as far as what actually happened, unless one of you guys actually knows.
He definitely he went to college. I think he dropped out, but he went to, I want to say NYU. I think he went to.
I think that's what it said. Yeah.
Yeah.
He did advertising for Levi's, American Steel, back when it was American Steel, and other things. But the jobs were good, but not very consistent. So he got lured back to comics by two dorks that wrote letters to comic book companies. And they found out Jim Shooter's address, and they went to his house and were like, man, we're real big Legion fans. And we could really use some help. Please come back and write that book. And so he did. Anybody know anything about those issues?
Yeah. No, those were good.
I mean,
Mike Grell drew a lot of them.
Yeah.
That's some early Grell stuff. It's really, it's a lot of nice looking stuff. And that's what gets us to the Stargrave stuff, because that Brainiac Stargrave storyline happens right at the very end when Paul Levitz takes over for his first run. But you have Paul Levitz taking over, who was about 17 at the time, and he was taking over the book because I believe he was like 11 when he was reading and inspired by Jim Shooter's Legion run. And
Jerry Conway was on the book also, right?
He got on shortly after Paul for like some fill-ins, and then eventually Paul, after the Earth War storyline, had to step down, and then Jerry was the primary writer of that for a little while. He would take turns writing just about every title that was coming out from the big two in the 70s. So like,
I mean, he worked over at Marvel when he was a child, right? I mean, that was where he first cut his teeth, I think, or maybe that's
Spider-Man was certainly his biggest assignment.
Yeah,
and that was before. He did Spider-Man before he did Legion. Yeah.
I don't think he was 18. I think he was younger than that too. I mean, that's crazy. I know people worked younger back in the day, but my goodness.
Well, the 70s was really the era of Jim Shooter, I think, really started where you started getting more of the fans starting to come into the business. Like Don McGregor was another big comics fan who became a longtime writer in the 70s. Obviously,
it's not an uncommon theme. I mean, I always thought that like the comic book creators I was reading, the stuff in the 80s that I really liked, they were like, man, if I'm at a party and someone finds out I'm a writer, I'm going to try and not let them know that I'm a comic book writer, that type of thing. And,
they might have been self-aware enough of that, but there were still fans.
Sure. But again, kind of like that sports analogy, or even better than that, wrestling, when a fan comes in and wants to be a part of the industry, the old timers are kind of like, I don't know if we like these fans. They look on those people differently. Now there's so many people that are in it that are fans or from that fandom, and like second and third generations, that it's not that big a deal. But there definitely was a time, and we're talking about in the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. That's pretty, that's wild. I think it's wild. Those old timers were still there until they weren't there anymore, right?
Well, you got two ways of looking at things. There's some people that resent anybody coming in no matter what, and there's ones that'll say, if they can help us win, I don't care, how old they are, what they look like, et cetera, et cetera. And I just looked up. Jerry Conway was 20 when he killed off Gwen Stacy.
Oh, 20.
Yeah.
Okay.
20.
Okay.
Which is still very young.
That's 20. There's 20-year-olds now can't complete a sentence without their phone.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it fills in a lot of the sentence. I'm going to use it. What can I say? Green. It knows what I like to say.
Yeah, but you may have actually talked to humans before, so
I have talked to humans before. In the 70s, mid-70s, Jim Shooter becomes the associate editor at Marvel, and that's when he finds out about all the shenanigans that are going on at that time. Anybody care to tell me what was going on at Marvel at the time, Breen?
Well, I said I wasn't there, but I said I do remember. They said there was a different editor-in-chief. Seems like every 6 months. What was it? Jerry Conway lasted 3 weeks and then went to DC or something. And yeah, I said a lot of the guys were editing their own work, which as a reader, I didn't notice.
For sure.
But I'd rather have those guys editing themselves than what passes for editors today. But that's for another time. But it was definitely kind of run like a frat house. There wasn't any. There didn't seem to be any repercussions for missing deadlines. In fact, they even had a pet name for it, the dreaded Deadline Doom. And I can remember getting an issue of Fantastic Four right in the middle of the Brute storyline, and I'm looking at the first page. It's oh wow, I didn't know Jack Kirby was doing Fantastic Four. Crystals in the it's a reprint, and that was common, and that was the kind of stuff that he definitely put a stop to once he got full control.
So it took a while for that to happen, and of course he made a lot of enemies along the way, right?
Well, he when we're talking about this, love him or hate him on that level, Jim Shooter not only made Marvel better, he inadvertently made DC better by moving a lot of people there. If it wasn't for Jim Shooter, we wouldn't have gotten New Teen Titans. We wouldn't have gotten what, ended up becoming, Crisis on Infinite Earths, what the Wonder Woman run from George Perez. We wouldn't have gotten John Byrne's Man of Steel reboot. Like there's a lot of stuff that just would not have happened under another EIC. He was not liked for certain reasons, but it's funny because I believe Marv Wolfman was the one who poached Jim from Marvel, from DC over to Marvel, and he was one of the first people to wrap up what he was doing and get the hell out of there when Jim was really rising up. So
that's right. Yeah, he did, and I think what it was he was like, man, you guys got to get your shit done. Like number one, you got to get your stuff done and on time. He found out Marvel was losing a ton of money because you have to put, if you don't get your book on time, you're still getting charged money for that, for not coming out. They had people that were stealing customers' money for subscriptions. I'm like, I'm reading this. This is crazy. Yeah, just stuff like that. So he really got stuff together. It felt like at times within his Marvel run as editor-in-chief. So what he had to work his way to do it, man. He had to get approval, and sometimes he had to get Stan Lee to come back and talk to people and get them to be okay with something as far as what's going on. But basically, every single person that was their own editor eventually left the company, and because they didn't want to deal with Jim Shooter or any of this stuff. And it's like you said, Marv Wolfman goes on over to DC, and then he does that stuff. Of course, he pissed off George Perez, and then George Perez, I think famously, maybe I forget how long it was like a 10-year contract with DC that he wanted to be exclusive with them. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to go back to Marvel.
No, he spent all the best stuff he did in the 80s, obviously, was over at DC. But it's interesting though, because you see all of that happen, but it's different personality types. Like I believe he said in an interview that he referred to Marvel when he had gotten there as like a hippie commune. Like it was just a bunch of people who were like taking turns being editor-in-chief. No one was dressed up. He wanted, if you were staff at Marvel, he really wanted you in like suit and tie. He wanted people to be acting professional. And people act like everyone would jump ship because of him, or that, he was really difficult to work with. But at the same time, like his relationship with David Michelinie and Bob Layton was so enduring that they followed Jim to Valiant. So clearly there were people who could work with him. And additionally, I think this is a really important anecdote, is Jim Starlin, just shortly before we got on here, talked about, he was being very defensive of Jim. And he said, no one, I'm paraphrasing, but none of the other editors wanted the Death of Captain Marvel graphic novel. They didn't want to do it. They thought it was a bad idea. No one wanted to do it but Jim. And he believed in it so much that he rammed it through. That book literally would not exist if Jim Shooter didn't ram it through editorial.
And isn't it the case that's the one time he allowed the bending of continuity? Was for that story.
So. Yeah.
What's the bending? What's the bending part?
He was a stickler for continuity. But with everybody gathering to Captain Marvel's bedside, there's no way that could have worked in continuity because of you might have had the Avengers off-world, or somebody might have been in a death trap or whatever. So I mean, he basically said, just do what you need to do to make this story work, and that's. But think about what Shooter did about, I said, straightening everything out and making people do their jobs. I said, hey, nobody likes if everybody gets to have a party at work every day. Nobody wants the party to end. But an analogy I had, Joe, I think you'll get this. The Third Man, the movie.
Yeah.
Remember the scene when Harry's talking to Holly? He's talking about the 30 years during the, they said that, I can't remember the exact quote, but you had the Renaissance, you had Michelangelo, blah, blah, blah. I guess the Swiss had 500 years of peace and prosperity. And what did that produce? The cuckoo clock. Shooter's one was kind of like that speech Harry gave. And I wish I should have done some research so I could remember more of the things, but that's what it kind of reminds me of because of all the, the 70s. I started in the mid 70s. Really liked everything Marvel was doing, and I didn't know any better. And I liked a lot of the DC stuff, even though looking back, I look at it differently now, like it for different reasons. But when the 70s ended, X-Men, there really wasn't all that much memorable coming out of Marvel. But then you go to the first half, and it's 2025, and people still constantly talk about Claremont and Burns' X-Men, Miller's Daredevil, Simonson's Thor, Burns' FF. And they said, and there's so much great stuff that they don't even get to O'Neill's Iron Man or Stern's Avengers. To say nothing of the people that were writing it. Denny O'Neil did some great Spider-Mans. Stern did some great Spider-Mans. And there's just too many to mention. You look forward to damn near every Marvel comic through the as the 80s went on. And also, he said that Shooter driving Burnout led to Superman. I kind of think that may have happened anyway, because didn't Jeanette Kahn solicit pitches? And wasn't Byrne the only one that said that Superman is the mask that Clark Kent wears, basically? And that was just such a different way of looking at the character that he got in. And who wouldn't want that creative challenge? But either way, it's still. But not to say that they did not like each other. I know that, and that didn't change.
Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, it cemented it. Like, maybe it would have happened either way, but if Jim wasn't in the picture, there's a chance that he could have ended up having a longer run on X-Men, and then that could have changed when things happened. So
didn't he and Claremont just butt heads too much for that relationship to continue, or was it being offered FF?
What ended up happening was, when Roger Stern was the editor, he was more beholden, right? He was more beholden to Byrne. So when they would have disputes, Roger was more often aside with Byrne. So he was happy about that. When Jim Salicrup came in, he was a bit more of a neutral. He was a little more neutral, but he still leaned towards Byrne. When Jim Shooter hired Wheezy and put her on X-Men, when Jim Salicrup graciously offered it to her, because he was more of an Avengers and related books fan anyway. She came in with no bias towards any of them and came at it right down the middle on everything, which is what led, and she really started right at the tail end of the Phoenix Saga. So it emboldens the frustration that Byrne had, which led to his departure. But if Jim Shooter didn't hire Wheezy and get her in that position, and he still had Jim or Roger editing that book, he probably would have stayed on it longer.
Yeah, there's a lot of the thing is like, as I'm reading the Jim Shooter passages in the 80s book, it gets into the whole thing with John Byrne and Chris Claremont to the point where you're not reading about Jim Shooter anymore. It's fascinating stuff. And then you move over to Frank Miller. We didn't talk about Frank Miller during the Jim Shooter run. He's doing Daredevil. He's bringing a title that the only reason why it's not canceled is because they like it. And then he's like, I got this guy, Frank. He's going to be good. I'm just telling you, it's going to be good. And then, of course, it picks up, and it's the hit that it is. Frank Miller is the hit that he is. I was talking to Breen beforehand, and I wanted to bring up maybe some of the things that are so great that Jim Shooter did is very much akin to how people talk about Watchmen and Alan Moore's style of writing, Frank Miller, his Dark Knight Returns, and how all these people that come in just love it. Now we've got fans of people that like things so many. Now we're talking about Dark Knight Return fans only, right? Or that kind of stuff. And they come in and they want to tell their Dark Knight Returns story. And it's just not necessarily a good thing all the time, especially all the time. Like, everybody has to have their Dark Knight story now or something like that. Kind of like this companies these days, Jim Shooter pretty much got the ball rolling with Secret Wars. I mean, Marvel did other miniseries beforehand, but they weren't really superhero related. DC has Crisis on Infinite Earths, but that's just once in a while. Now it's all the time, to the point where we get one for the first part of the year, we got one in the second part of the year, we got Marvel doing 5-part team, annuals, or it's a lot of events that are going on, and that's just talking about the main companies. You have DC or Image, and you have those guys that do Rogue Sun, and then eventually they have their own little team up book, and then or event book, and you get to the 90s, and we're talking about Valiant, and then within the first year they have an event book, and it's always an event book now all the time. And I think, Jim Shooter, you know what I mean?
I think at some point we lost track of where the company crossover ends and the event begins, because like if you take Atlantis Attacks, I think it was, went through the annuals. I didn't really consider that an event so much as it's like a continuing story / crossover. And you're right, before Secret Wars, the best example I can think of was the Avengers Defenders War, and that was because Steve Englehart was writing both books, and he had to convince Roy Thomas to do it. My, how times have changed. But Secret Wars begat in Crisis, and then DC started doing one a year, which looking back now didn't seem so bad. And Marvel didn't really do as much. I mean, like Mutant Massacre, books like that would like bleed over into, say, a stray issue of Thor or Power Pack of all places type of thing. But I think DC turned the event into an event before Marvel did. And now they both have just completely gone batshit event crazy. But yeah, so for that, thanks, Jim.
But it was a hit. I was looking at the numbers. Holy cow. The 11th issue of Secret Wars did 700,000 copies sold. Whew. It's a lot of comics. One thing that is common is the refrain, comics are dying. We're on our way out. We got to get some Hollywood jobs or something like that. That's what like Marv Wolfman was all about. I'm going to stick around until I can't stick around anymore, and then I'm going to go get a real job. Comics are on their way out. All sorts of people were saying that. And the 90s happened, and comics are on their way out. Some people say it now because of the sales. The sales, though, I mean, if we can't compare creators to yesterday, or the way things are to yesterday, maybe sports teams, whatever it may be, should we really take a look at sales and say, boy, things are really bad now when it used to be this way? Because you can say that with just about anything.
To a point. If you go back 40, 50 years, when you think about the changes that have been made to the way we consume entertainment, whether it's video games going from it stands in the hourglass speed of Pong to what we have today. 2D entertainment just can't compete with that. That said, we both know that there are things that both companies could do right now, even in 2025, to boost their sales that they steadfastly refuse to do. Like case in point, put Peter and Mary Jane's marriage back together, and Spider-Man's selling more than the 48,000 copies that it is now. We all three of us know that. Will they ever get back to will another book ever legitimately sell 700,000 copies again? God,
that was a special situation. Let's be real.
Yeah. I mean, I said it's, I know that Spawn supposedly shipped 500,000, Spawn 300. Well, 400,000 of them are still in back rooms of comic shops, if not more. So, it's never going to be what it was, but it can be better than it is. Is that a vague enough answer?
No, I think that's good. What do you think, Joe? I mean, The reality is just
I'll be
not
right
as
back.
many people are. Yeah, no problem. Not as many people are reading comics these days, right? Or buying comics, I should say.
Sure, it's all.
I don't know what it is.
It's you can get it to happen again, but in terms of readership, right? Like you can get that many people reading or picking up the comic, but the distribution has to change. That means the profit margin might change, but like it's possible. Maybe it's through some sort of streaming type service or subscription model. Maybe it's focusing more on digital. Maybe it's maybe there is a way to package it physically. Maybe it's not Takabon, maybe it is, maybe it's something similar.
You think that kills the monthly comic just a bit?
It does, but like I think if you want to, like, for the big two, I do think moving forward though they need to put out less monthly, like less comics.
I agree.
And focus on the quality and bring up the quality of the books, and like you can build it back up. But like, does like Marvel, for example, like, could you get by with 4 really high quality X-Men titles instead of putting out a lot of miniseries stuff like that? Like maybe it's better off making sure like there's an X title out every Wednesday, but that it's X-Men, Uncanny, X-Force, X-Factor, Wolverine, or whatever it is, and just no matter what, and then like no matter what, there's always going to be an X title out there. Same thing with Spider-Man. It's like you do Spider-Man, Spectacular Spider-Man, and like you try like a Venom title, and maybe there's one other thing. But like, keep it to, keep the different groups so that way something's coming out every week. But, it's not such a bloated line because it feels like things are getting lost in the shuffle because it's just, it's hard to market that many books every week.
It's so many books.
Yeah.
The last 2 weeks have been killer. This is a much smaller week. There's a few really important titles that everybody's going to want to get. And then there might be some special things, maybe a Ghost Machine. There's a Hyde Street tie-in book that's coming out. Not that much. If things were more like this, I feel like if things were bi-monthly again to some degree, or we had team-up books or dollar books or what I would have called a dollar book, which might be a $9 book these days. Something like that would be, I like, you could depend on those to come out and then you can have all those characters, but having a Green Arrow and having 2 Green Lantern books, and they're going to have an event, by the way, and having a bunch of Superman books. I love Superman, but even, you just can't read all of them. Can you? I mean, I do have customers that buy a lot of comic books, a lot of different issues, never duplicates, a lot of comic books. So maybe they have the time for it, but I do not. I don't know how you are about that, but I do not. Eric's saying he's reading 40 books a month. That's crazy.
Well, it used to be over 100.
That's crazy.
Yeah, in the 80s, it was as many as DC or Marvel were publishing, plus a ton of indies.
Yeah,
really
good indies.
The second half of the first decade of the 2000s, I thought DC and Marvel were excellent, with the exception of their Marvel's flagship character and DC's arguably flagship character, Superman. But I was reading probably easily 100 titles a month.
Damn. What were you doing at that time? Were you working in a comic store?
No.
Oh my gosh. How do you have the time for that?
That's a good question. What happened?
Lots of cocaine.
Yeah, I didn't read I had this 55,000 comic book collection when I sold it.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't have time to read any of the back issues. I'd go to conventions and buy 300 back issues and end up reading a handful of them and then bagging and boarding the rest of them because it took too long. Any spare comic book time I had went to keeping up with the new stuff.
Yeah.
All right, I got a question for you guys about Jim Shooter here. There's a lot of conversation about him wanting to have killed off every single Marvel character and replacing them with new characters of the same style. Now, there's Jim Starlin going to bat for him was like, this is more like we go out drinking and then it's being talked about, just kind of bullshit. And then it gets around the office. But, oh, geez, I can't remember who it is who quit Marvel because he was so upset. Oh, Doug Moench, right?
Mm-hmm.
So supposedly he might be a little bit even more upset about Gene Day having died. And maybe things he might have said about not being paid a lot of money. And so he's kind of taking out his anger on Jim Shooter. But he ditched Marvel when he was getting moved from Master of Kung Fu. And then he went over to DC and started doing all the Batman books.
Yeah.
But later on, there's interviews and more conversation about Jim Shooter bringing that up. Jim Shooter actually bringing it up. And then later on, he does the New Universe, which sounded like he would have loved to have replaced with the Marvel characters. On the one hand, I think he was smart because he realized these IPs get stale. You want to marry them off. And if you don't, because you want to revert stuff, people revolt and won't like it later on. Might be a thing that happens. Or you just can't keep telling something from somebody that came out from the 1930s. You can only retcon them so many times before you're like, man, I'm never going to use the Punisher again because Vietnam was a long time ago. Or else it has to be a different war, and then it's not as good. So he brought the New Universe in, which flopped, right? But was he trying? I mean, is this a thing that editors like to do? Dan Didio wanted to do it. We had the future thing, how he hates all the legacy characters. Other people have done stuff like that, but I can't think of who they might be right now. Do you think, number one, do you think Jim Shooter did want to do that? And number two, do you think maybe we do need to get past it? I mean, there was the Silver Age, right?
Yeah, I have to say one thing first with what you brought up, because this actually came up in conversation at ALA with a buddy of mine who brought up, at this point, what billionaire is going to a dingy circus by himself and would like pick up like an orphan? Like we're just so far removed from this. Like Bruce's wealth has gotten like comical, and then just the whole situation in a way where it's like the more you retcon these things, the more you get people thinking about that kind of stuff, and the more like you sort of get lost in that shuffle. But when it comes to Jim, and I think he was ready. He was very much ready to wipe it away and replace them if necessary, but it didn't end up being necessary. And necessary could have been the New Universe really blew up and you could have sidelined a bunch of them, sure. But I do think he wanted to put out entertaining stuff, but he also wanted to make a profit, make a splash. When Jim Salicrup got told like, oh, we're gonna marry Peter and Mary Jane, people who were reading the books at the time might recall that happened very quickly. That was fairly abrupt overall. I mean, they had been dating. It wasn't like a total out of left field, like a character you never heard of, but it was abrupt in the story. Jim thought he was supposed to start planting the seeds for it, and other Jim Shooter was like, no, this is happening much sooner. You don't get time to do that. So, like, Jim was ruthless in terms of pushing things forward to make a splash and sell books, which has its pluses and minuses. Because another great example of that is when he told Claremont, X-Men's too popular, we have to do another book. And he wasn't really keen on writing New Mutants. And Jim said, if you don't, I'm getting someone who will. And Chris ended up doing it. And as they kept going and the books were popular, it was Jim who was pushing, expanding the line. So I don't think Jim's goal was to replace all the Marvel characters with the new universe, but I think it was doing it. And if it worked out that it was popular, he would have been ready to do it if needed.
I mean, Marvel Superhero Secret Wars, when they went in the thing and went to the planet, did their thing and came back, people were different than they were before. It's almost like wiping the slate clean, or I don't know, something different at least. Oh, that was another thing. In when Spider-Man gets the black costume, what was the lesson we learned from that? Costume changes. That was a big thing in the 90s. You got your Daredevil costume change. You got your Batman Azrael suit. You got all sorts of stuff like that. And they're doing it again right now. Daredevil's back in black.
Well, you got your first Daredevil costume change in 1964.
Ooh, you're right. You know, I have a friend. He says that he liked the original costume because it was proof that the guy was blind.
Yeah. And speaking of, if you think about it, and you go back and read all those Spider-Mans, Peter and Mary Jane really didn't date that long. They wrote her out of the entire the whole comic book universe for years, and brought her back, and then they knew each other. But even when she, told him she knew who he was, I think he proposed to her. She turned him down again, and then like a year later, which in comic book time would be like 2 months at the most, they're married.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I agree with you, Breen. There is a lot of people that are very loud about Spider-Man and Peter Parker and Mary Jane.
Well,
I would agree.
I'm one of them. I would love to see them married again.
Really?
Yes.
Really?
I don't like Arrested Development Peter Parker. I haven't read Spider-Man regularly in 15 years. I mean, they said Sins Past didn't make me quit, although a friend of mine still has not bought a new Spider-Man since then. One More Day wasn't going to make me quit until I got a eye full of Brand New Day. And I read that for a while, but then when I realized that it was going to be almost like something personal with editorial, not to do it, I don't. Like I said, now he's, depending on, here it is like 20 years after the marriage almost, and there are times when he's like a complete sad sack. And they said there were no interesting stories with them married. I disagree. There's from 87 to like 2000 when they got Howard, they made Howard Mackie the Hatchet Man, broke him up in an annual, and she went off to LA. Then they put him back together for about 2 years, about 4 or 5 years later. Yeah, I thought that through the 90s, the stories were fine.
Okay. All right.
And that's just me.
No, it's fine.
To quote Perch, your mileage may vary.
Yes. I know you guys are very passionate about it. I just have read more Spider-Man that didn't have Mary Jane involved.
Well, I think I've read everything from AF-15 through Brand New Day. And and that includes every issue of Web, every issue of Spectacular. I've read them all, and honestly, if there were no passion for it, I still wouldn't be reading this stuff at 63. I started when I was 13. So,
yeah, I hear you. All right, last couple things. Jim Shooter, not the first, but definitely was able to get creators to get performance bonuses. That's where the 100,000 comes in, where people make 100,000 and then they get bonuses. And it seemed like the writers got more than the artists, but the artists got more than the letterers and the colorists and all those other people. But people were making pretty good money in the 80s under Jim Shooter. And the X-Men were really, really raking in the bucks. Holy cow. And they gave like $3 million in performance bonuses 1 year. And whew, damn. And we know Chris Claremont was writing a couple of those books. And Star Wars, even when it got canceled, it was like 100,000 copies sold. That was another thing that I was talking to Breen beforehand. Jim Shooter was kind of like, Star Wars was so successful that they looked for so many things that during the late 70s, they weren't producing any new comic book titles that weren't like, Battlestar Galactica, Planet of the Apes, things like that. Pretty, and now Dynamite. Oh, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Go buy Green Hornet and Miss Fury.
Well, Planet of the Apes actually was, God, I'm not well actually, guy. Were just reprints of the magazine, but there was ROM, Micronauts, I'm probably a couple other ones I'm not.
I love Micronauts. Godzilla, Shogun Warriors.
There you go. But at least they did a pretty good job of integrating this into the Marvel universe. And we're smart enough to keep ROM out of everybody else's books because they knew they would eventually lose the license, and they didn't want to lose the reprints.
I feel that a lot of the magic that Jim Shooter had over at Marvel was getting people to work in the office. Number one, getting people to work in the offices. And not having more than not having a person do more than one job. And he got people to do advertising, and he really, really boosted the profile of the company in ways that it hadn't been before and made it a lot more professional. But the people that he was going and pilfering from other companies like Ann Nesenti, and Wheezy was like from Warren, I think it was. He got them to pick up these people, and John Burns coming over from Charlton, and all these other people working. Frank Miller barely did anything. He got them at just the right time, put them on the books, let them do the thing. And whether or not he was good or lucky, it's better to be lucky than good. He had, when I think about all the great creators that I love and I can reread and I can remember, it's Byrne and Stern and Claremont, and it's freaking Simonson, it's Perez, it's Frank Miller, it's all those people, Wheezy, Michael Golden, all those people. Of course, some of them did work over at DC. And people bounced back and forth, and people didn't like Shooter, but they still worked with him. He got, they did Epic, where they had creator-owned comic books. Jim Starlin, probably another reason why Jim Starlin fronts for him. He got Dreadstar over there. Yeah. Got all the Dreadstar, all the trilogy and all the Dreadstar issues were printed through Epic until it left to another company, and he owned it. So that was a cool thing. So Jim Starlin did a lot of really good things for creators, but I'm not so sure if he did the greatest bit of work for frickin' Jack Kirby though. Because at the time there was a lot of people saying, hey, let's get Jack Kirby his artwork back. And and that was like a real big thing when Miller was doing Daredevil, I recall. And I'm not sure if it was like in a comics journal, Amazing Heroes, or where that stuff was coming from, but I remember seeing it. And it might have been in like independent books also. So like maybe a Pacific or something like that. Maybe, in the 80s for sure. So, anybody got anything to say about Jim's contributions to creators, or his?
He got Steve Ditko back to Marvel.
There you go.
You know, no one else was able to do it before that. He was doing
Speedball. We got Speedball out of that,
right? Squirrel Girl, but
Rom,
but
Rom,
yeah, but yeah, no, he did a lot also in terms of getting freelancers and other employees healthcare through Marvel, which was a perk he fought for. Larry Hama shared a story about one of Frank Miller's proteges who Larry was working with, filled out the paperwork, but he ended up dying of a massive heart attack and didn't get the paperwork filed for the insurance. So Larry went to Jim, and Jim said, do not tell, it was just like, did you tell anyone that he's dead? Don't tell anybody. I'm going to file it. It's the right thing to do. As far as we know, we didn't know he was dead, and he filed it. And got this guy's family coverage when it would have been significantly easier to just be like, sorry, man, I'm not doing it. I'm not putting my neck out like that. That's, those are unheard of kind of stories that I think reinforce how complicated Jim is, because there were so many people who had, issues with him, and then it would be hard to not have, it's like, how do you see a guy that does something like that and not think that there's at least something, good and redeeming in this guy? Another thing he did, which is just this anecdote that Ty Templeton shared, was that they were all out at a con, and they ended up deciding that they were going to go eat at Hooters. And Ty Templeton was going along, but he didn't really want to. He didn't want to give money and want to get really involved in it, because I believe he had a young daughter at the time and just didn't feel right about it. So Jim noticed that what Ty was doing and asked him, and he was kind of like, and Jim joined him in solidarity, not getting anything, and sitting with him just having water, just to so he wasn't alienated from sort of the rest of the group.
Nice.
These are these kind of stories that it's a shame. I think a lot of people haven't heard them until after he passed, but he was a more, I think he's maybe a more complex person than people who have even referred to him that way give him credit for.
Hold on just a moment. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Let us know in the comments down below what your favorite Jim Shooter books are. I have a big question for you guys, but first I want to let everybody know that the names scrolling down below are our patrons. You could be a patron, just follow Fantastic Comics, but more importantly, follow us on Substack. You get funny newsletters, and you can find out about signings. We had Joe Casey last week. It was pretty awesome.
Nice.
But we're not going to talk about that. My question to you guys, and you can just say yes or no, or extrapolate. We'll start with Breen. A lot of people in the last 5 years have been saying we need to get Jim Shooter back. Is Jim Shooter the guy that needed to come back, or could a guy like Jim Shooter accomplish what a guy like Jim Shooter did back then? And we're talking about Marvel, really.
Again, not to the degree that he did in his original tenure, because the business has changed so much. He wouldn't be allowed to do the stuff that would be necessary to do. Now, if he could come back and institute the same policies that he had back then? Maybe, but Marvel definitely and DC definitely needs someone with a firmer hand and someone that understands, because the unique thing about Shooter was he understood both creative and administration, which kind of made him uniquely qualified in those days. I mean, he was wise beyond his years business with a business sense, and he'd been creative since he was barely in his teens.
Yeah.
So those guys, there are not that many of them out there. And I think, like I said, if you could find somebody that with at least some of his qualities, both Marvel and DC could benefit tremendously from that.
Who's that guy right now? Anybody? That gal right now. Who's that person?
I'm going to say the same. I'm going to answer that same way. I said when the Democrats were trying to figure out how to stop the Reagan-Bush dynasty, and so I said, "Well, who are they going to run against him?" I don't know, because nobody knew who Bill Clinton was at the time. But a year later, or 18 months later, he's president, and everybody knows that guy is out there. We just don't know who it is.
Yeah.
Is it a fan? Why don't you go ahead? Do you think it can happen? Was Jim the guy to do it, or somebody like him? Could that have happened? Could it have worked?
Yeah, no, I mean, it couldn't have been Jim at that point, because you need someone like, it's hard when you've already been at the helm of as many companies that Jim has had at that point to come in with a real fresh perspective. I think. I do think you need a fresh face. It can be someone whose background's in comics, but we don't know them yet. I do think, in general, we need people in this industry that aren't ashamed to be in this industry. We need people who are excited about the industry and what comics can do. I think all of us, one way or another, we grown or we're tired of seeing this constant, like, let's make a big deal about so-and-so because they have nothing to do with comics, or they're a celebrity who has, graced their presence in their off hours with, scribbling a little script for us to indulge. That's far beyond those of a mortal comic creator, and it's like it gets old. I want people who are excited for comics. I want people because that's the only way you're gonna improve it, because if you're constantly saying other mediums are better and we're just grateful that you give us the attention, whether you're saying it directly or not, you're telling people, oh, those other things are the more important things. So why am I going to waste my time on the lesser thing when I can just go straight to the movie or the prose novel or the video game instead?
The celebrity does not seem to help the comic book industry or the politician running for something.
Mm-hmm.
It's something we're better off letting the pros, who would you rather have writing your book, CM Punk or Tom DeFalco,
or some kid, maybe,
or tomorrow
some fan, you guys have a favorite Jim Shooter issue or storyline? I like the Korvac saga, but I really like the What If Korvac saga. But
since you mentioned it, I'll lead on. I said Korvac saga is my favorite. The Korvac saga is my Dark Phoenix saga.
Nice,
because I've always been more of an Avengers fan than X-Men, so that is my favorite storyline of all time. I only wish Perez could have seen the art through, because the last 3 issues were done by a fantasy artist that, in theory, sounds great, but it just did not work.
Was that Wenzel? Was that
David Wenzel?
Yeah. You got a favorite, Joe?
It might be Adventure Comics 353. That's the Death of Pharaoh Lad. That whole storyline, I mean, really, like if I could do a run, it would be, his first run on Legion. Just the amount of creativity, how enduring it was. I also put up there, I'm blanking on it now. I have a copy somewhere over there, but the first appearance of Parasite, that story, which it's like it was one in multiple, so I think it was maybe 12 pages, but the origin issue of Parasite is just as good as most of the Silver Age first appearance villains in Spider-Man. It is an excellent origin story.
All right, I'll check it out.
It's great. Parasite's a fantastic villain. He goes out in a pretty bad way, and all that, but it's really good. It's really compelling. And what a great, and again, one of the most enduring, rogues gallery villains for Superman. He's one that a lot of fairly casual Superman fans are aware of. And it was created by a kid who was at that point in a high school science class and thought that was cool and made a villain.
That's awesome. All right, going to the chat really quick. Jim wrote Captain Action 1 and 2, drawn by Wally Wood and Gil Kane. I did notice that. When will Marvel and DC capitalize on Shooter's passing with a collected edition of Shooter's best stories? I think just the epic collections of his Avengers are probably pretty good when it comes to that. Let's see. Jasper Plan 9 says, I met Shooter once. He was kind. I have a Secret Wars 8-3 signed by Shooter, Zek, and Beatty. All right, awesome. He also says, Art T-Bear told a story about Shooter today, piggybacking on what Joe is saying. Art told him, Jim, that he makes creating comics not a fun job to do. Art did a good stream today sharing Shooter's stories. Excellent. I would check those out. Eli, fourth Spider-Man title should be Marvel Team Up. Amen. Talking my language. Shooter was too old to face the malarkey of today's mainstream silliness. And Korvac saga for Zach. All right, excellent. For me personally, I like his Harbinger.
Harbinger's really good.
I
really like that. Yeah.
And Dave Lapham.
David Lapham. Yeah.
Yep,
so
Dave
Lapham.
That was before Stray Bullets. And because of that book and Plasm, actually, I was like, oh, Stray Bullets, it's him. I'm on it all the way. And it was the best.
Can I say one more thing before we get out of here?
Yeah.
Best perspective of how good Jim Shooter was at a young age. He was creating Legion characters when his peers were creating Dial H for Hero characters.
Oof. Yeah, well, that's why I feel the way I do about Dial H for Hero. All right, everybody. Thanks for hanging out. The next time we get together, it'll be from somebody that's alive, I promise.
Yes.
I hope I didn't jinx this. I got the guy, lady, whoever. Bye. See you next time.
Good night, kids.
I think I ended.